kind of get the sense like it might not ever happen, right? Like this is too good to ever possibly be true. How could it ever happen? And then you get the phone call and you're like, oh my gosh, this might actually happen. And then you're the way you're working then shifts a little bit. You start, you do more mission specific training and you're with your crew you're going to fly with, and it starts to seem more real. But it really and truly, I mean, honestly, is not until you're strapped into the rocket, facing up on the launch pad, that you believe it's really going to happen. And even then, it's not, I don't think, until you're in that 10, 9, 8 phase that you think you might actually get off the pad.
My guest this week is Nicole Stott, who is an astronaut, artist, and earthling. Nicole has a bachelor's degree in aeronautical engineering and a master's in engineering management, and she worked as an engineer before becoming one of NASA's astronauts, where she served for 15 years. She served on the International Space Station, she served on the Space Shuttle, she spent over 100 days in space, and she also became the 10th woman to do a spacewalk. Now Nicole focuses on her art, and she is the founding director of the Space for Art Foundation, and she's also the author of Back to Earth, a fantastic book which you can see over my shoulder. And this is about her time in space and what it taught her about how we can protect Earth. Nicole, welcome to STEM with Mr. N.
Thanks. It's great to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
It's an absolute pleasure to have you on. Can we just start with, what is aeronautical engineering?
It's, I love that question, and I've never had it before, actually. And it was something that, as I was getting ready to graduate from high school, I discovered I didn't even know what aeronautical engineering was, but I knew that I wanted to learn how things fly, like how airplanes fly. And somebody said, well, if you want to do that, that's aeronautical engineering. And while I was studying aeronautical engineering, I was like, man, if I couldn't, I don't know how I didn't think about this before, but like, man, if you want to know how airplanes fly, how can you not want to know how rocket ships fly? And that kind of, evolved into the ultimately being the astronaut thing.
So aeronautical engineering is just all about how things fly.
Yep.
Yep. And
Yep. Pretty, well, I say pretty simple, but it's not very simple.
no, well, it becomes part of actual rocket science, doesn't it? When you're trying to figure that
Yeah,
out.
absolutely. And it's funny when I think back to choosing to study that at university, it really was just based on me thinking, I want to know how things fly. I want to fly myself, but even more, I was interested in how things fly. And like I said, somebody told me what this aeronautical engineering thing was, and I just kind of blindly went off and did it. I think if somebody had said, oh, and it's kind of difficult, I might have hesitated. But I think when you just kind of go for it, it's amazing what can open up for you. Really cool.
Yeah, and when you first went to NASA, you were there to work as an engineer, weren't you, on the space shuttle?
Yeah, I started out of college. When I graduated, there were no jobs at NASA, which bummed me out. But I found a really fun job down at a company called Pratt and Whitney that was building these advanced engines for stealth fighter things and stuff. And so I got to work on that for a little while, and then was, yeah, for like 10 or 11 years, a NASA engineer on the space shuttle program. And then later on, when we were building and developing the space station program. And so got to work not just on the design and development of these things, but really like hands-on with the spacecraft themselves and the people that were maintaining them and getting them ready to fly, which absolutely was the best preparation for getting ready to fly on one of those spaceships later in life.
And
Yeah.
how far into your career at NASA as an engineer did you decide, now I'm done with all the engineering part of this, I actually want to fly on one of these?
I'm a little slow. I think it was probably, I don't know, probably 8 into the 10 years of working at Kennedy Space Center, where I started thinking a little bit more seriously about astronaut, like even being a possibility. Because up until then, I kind of thought, and this is, I'm old enough, I watched those first men walk on the moon. I think even at 6 or 7 years old, wow, that's pretty extraordinary to think about people, on this place that you've only seen in the sky before or read about in your, textbooks, or been presented something about it, by teachers like you in the classroom, where, you're learning about it as kind of this place that just seems untouchable. And then there were people there. And as I progressed through my time as an engineer with NASA, I started to see what astronauts do. And it became, I don't know, it started to feel like it could be real. Because I honestly thought that's something other special people get to do. Seems so out there. Why would they pick me? It's such a cool thing. All the kinds of things we can do to talk ourselves out of something, even when nobody has told us no yet. And very thankful to see what astronauts do, and discovered that, man, 99.9% of it, best I could tell, was not flying in space, sadly, to astronauts. It's down here on Earth. And how cool that was, that most of what they were doing as astronauts here on Earth was a lot like what I was doing as a NASA engineer. And so, in my rambly, long story short way, I finally thought about it enough that I reached out to a couple people that I considered to be mentors, and very thankful to them for, they didn't do either of the extremes that we sometimes do when people ask us for advice, right? They didn't go, "Oh, Nicole, you'll make the best astronaut there ever was. You've got to do this." They didn't say that, though I'd like to think they feel like that now, but they didn't say that. And they didn't discourage me. They didn't go, "Oh, Nicole, thousands of people apply for this. Really slim chance, but go for it if you want." They didn't say that. They just really and truly, I mean, I felt like it was the greatest thing in the way they lifted me up by just saying, "Here's the pen, fill out the application." Like the one thing I had control of in the whole process. It's like they gave me permission to do that, even though I had it on my own, but wouldn't have accepted it. And I am so thankful to them for that.
Then
Yeah.
it's good to have those mentors out there, but even like people like yourself that other people can hear from at a distance what they went through can make a difference as well with changing their mindset. And that's why,
Yeah.
again, I'm so privileged to have you on to be able to speak about that, the impact that mentors and people around us can have. But
Yeah. Absolutely.
something you did say in your long answer there actually picks up something I wanted to go on to, which was, I'm only saying long answer because that was your words. I was enthralled with what you were saying, but
Yeah.
you'd said that you were fascinated by seeing what the astronauts were doing when they weren't flying. Now, you were an astronaut for, I believe, around 15 years, but of that 15 years, only 100 days was actually spent in space. So what do
Yeah.
astronauts do when they're not flying and they're not in space?
Well, I mean, we're training most of that time, and in different ways. Like a lot of it's like going back to school. We have to learn and stay up to date with what's going on with the spaceships that we'll fly on. And those are changing over time, how the systems change, how they run, what we'll do when we're on them to operate them. We have to know how to do spacewalks. I mean, that's really cool training in those big white suits. They weigh 300 pounds and you're doing stuff for 6 hours in a pool in them. How to fly the robotic arm, how to communicate with the people on the space station. And so we do a lot of working in the Mission Control Center and being that kind of comm link to the astronauts in space and to the mission control team. And we're helping develop the procedures and stuff for our colleagues that are flying in space, supporting them. And it's a really wonderful mix of things. So that 99.9% of time that's here on Earth, there is absolutely no complaining about it. It's extraordinary. The people you get to work with are extraordinary. Everybody is excited about this mission, that we're doing in space that ultimately is all about improving life on Earth. I mean, it's a really great environment to be in. And so that time on Earth it's kind of precious too. And very thankful for that. And I have friends now, like I have a friend, Mike Barrett, who is getting ready to fly on the next, it's called Crew 8. So it'll be the 8th time we've flown astronauts on the SpaceX Dragon vehicle. He and I were selected in the same astronaut class back in the year 2000, which to your students, I'm sure will seem like a long time ago, because it does to me now. And he is getting ready to fly his third space flight. We flew both times together on the 2 flights I had. And he is now flying his third flight after it's been 12 years since that last flight. So think about that time, yeah, It's a lot of time here on Earth, but it's so what we remind ourselves of is that we live on a planet that's our spaceship too. And so we're always trying to be crewmates down here as well.
And obviously, you're spending a lot of time down here working and supporting other people in space. But what was it like when you finally got that call to say that you were going to be on one of these missions? So, for your first mission?
Yeah, I don't think I mean, you want it to happen so bad, right? And, you love it. It honestly is a place, I mean, working there, all the years I had with NASA, even leading up to it, where I loved what I was doing, which is, I think, what we need to be doing no matter where we are. We need to be loving what we're doing. And it's kind of this, I don't know, you kind of get this sense like it might not ever happen, right? Like this is too good to ever possibly be true. How could it ever happen? And then you get the phone call and you're like, oh my gosh, this might actually happen. And then you're the way you're working then shifts a little bit. You start, you do more mission specific training and you're with your crew you're going to fly with, and it starts to seem more real. But it really and truly, I mean, honestly, is not until you're strapped into the rocket, facing up on the launch pad, that you believe it's really going to happen. And even then, it's not, I don't think, until you're in that 10, 9, 8 phase that you think you might actually get off the pad. But it's so surreal, like something you're working towards and you want to be a part of, and you just, until the engines are lighting, you can't believe it's actually going to happen.
And before that
Yeah.
moment, you've obviously got all your training that leads into it. For you, what was the toughest part of the training?
Wow. So the most physically challenging part of the training was absolutely learning how to do spacewalks. Working in that 300-pound suit in the water. We do, multiple runs in the water in those suits. And, unlike in space, it still weighs 300 pounds inside of the pool that we train in. They try to get you neutrally buoyant to offset that weight, but you're still like, you want to turn yourself this way and it just wants to flip you right back with your feet pointing down. And absolutely the most physically challenging thing I ever did was spacewalk training. And you have to have a smile on your face, the whole time. The pleasure is the pain, unless something is really hurting you, you've just got to kind of go with it for that 6.5 hours in the pool. And, but the most, challenging as far as like the study of it and the preparation that way was learning to speak Russian. And all crew members had to be able to speak English and Russian. The English is the official language, thank goodness, on the space station and across the programs. But the Russian Soyuz spacecraft, at the time I flew, was our rescue vehicle too. Even if you didn't fly to and from the station on it, it was the rescue vehicle, and it's all in Russian. The instrument panels, the procedures, the communication with the ground. And as a person who never studied another language all through school, I mean, I never had a Spanish class, nothing. I blame my mom. But to when I was 40-ish, learning now how to speak Russian was, I mean, our brains just aren't programmed then. So I highly recommend to all your students, do it now. Get those other languages, even if you don't use it later in life, your brain, the programming for learning another language will be there.
Yeah, and if you want to be an astronaut, start learning Russian now so you can
Yeah, or
get used
yeah,
to it.
but some other language, another language, just to have it so it makes it easier for your brain to accept the next one.
So now you've gone through the mentally tough part of learning Russian and the physically tough part of your spacewalk training, and you've got your surreal moment that you launch into space. What's it like when you first get into space and you have that experience of you're no longer on the Earth?
Yeah, it's extraordinary. I think one thing that all people who fly to space want to do almost like immediately when you get to space is you want to get out of your seat. You want like physically to feel what that floating is going to be like, and that's not just that's the second time too. You're like, oh, I got to get out of my seat. I want to be floating again. It's such a liberating feeling to be able to move in just effortlessly in 3 dimensions. So you want that. And then that as you're floating, you're like kind of fighting each other off to get to the window because you want your face in that window. You want to just like absorb this our planetary spaceship, the colors, the wonder of all that that's below you. You want to look at it in a way where like, oh my gosh, I am really in this place in space. Again, our brains, I don't think it's a bit overwhelming. So you're trying to register, I am in a really unusual place here as you're floating upside down and flying to get to the window. And so I think it's the reality check of it when you first get there is like, oh my gosh, I need to like, you need kind of the signals that tell you you're actually in that place. And it happens all the time. I mean, I woke up every morning wanting to get to the window.
Well, that covers my next question, which was, does your brain comprehend it any faster the second time round? But if you're waking up every morning going, I need to go and look at this, then obviously it still does have that big effect.
It is, what happens is I mean, you very quickly, it's so impressive how quickly our brains and our bodies adapt to even extreme environments, things that are so different to what we're normally used to. I mean, like floating and flying for months at a time and, not having the load of gravity on your body, that's a big difference. And yet our brain and our body somehow figures out that, okay, when I want to move from the Japanese module down into the laboratory, here's how I roll, here's what handrail I grab, flip and fly and all in 3 dimensions. And you just get it. And um, and it was really cool to me to see how when I went back the second time, I didn't have to readapt to, okay, how do I gracefully move? It was programmed into me now. Moving that way seemed natural. What you never get used to, I don't think, is that view out the window. That that just stunning. Every time you look at Earth, there's the surprise. It's gorgeous. It's, all these things that in some ways can be in contrast to what is actually happening on the planet, right? And like you're watching it with all this beauty with the mute button on, just experiencing it from that vantage point, and that never gets old. Yeah.
And we're going to come back round to that image in a wee bit
Yeah.
when we go on to talk about the art. But before we go on to that, just on the work side of things on the International Space Station, other than when you're getting the chance to look out the window, but what's it like working on the space station, and what sort of work goes on the space station?
I highly recommend it. It is so much fun. And, the way all of it was fun, whether you were doing a science experiment or fixing the toilet or a spacewalk or, eating, whatever it was, all of it was just, I mean, so much better in a positive way than I ever expected it to be. And I had really high expectations of what this experience was going to be like. And I think a lot of it, in addition to the environment you're in, this floaty flying kind of thing with Earth out the window, I think the fact that you're up there with really other incredible people, from all over the world. I mean, we're working as a crew that represents 16 different countries, all somehow peacefully and successfully working in that place. And that to me every morning, like put a smile on my face. Like, I'm not, this isn't just me up here. This is, a collective of earthlings on this higher mission, right? But we're doing everything. Right now we don't have enough missions to fly where we can just fly the doctor or we can fly the plumber or the scientist. So we become all of those things. And it's really, really neat to have this kind of jack of all trades thing where you're doing the maintenance on the station, you're doing the science for the researchers on the ground, you're doing a spacewalk, you're communicating with people, outreach. I mean, it's just this really wonderful mix of all of those things every day. And not one day was the same that I can think of. It's all just that kind of stuff, all mixed up all day long.
And it sounds incredible to develop all of those different skills. Like obviously you're a trained engineer, so fixing engineering problems is obviously more naturally within what you do, but running science experiments for other researchers, I take it there's a lot of other learning that needs to go on there then for you to do this on their behalf.
Yeah, I mean, there is. And that was what was so for me, just really interesting about the whole process was, yeah, I trained as an engineer. I understood engineering kinds of things. I've always loved hands-on stuff, so I knew I was supposed to set the torque wrench back to 0 after I used it, the tools, hands-on kind of things. But being like being the hands, the eyes, the ears, the implementer of some other person's science, that they've spent maybe a good part of their life preparing to have it go to space and then be implemented there. Man, that was a really cool thing to be a part of. And I mean, the deliberateness, the diligence you wanted to put into that science for that person, the relate and but you had to kind of open yourself up to learning new things that you might not have ever thought to learn on your own, right? You might not have ever thought you were curious about the way magnets work in space, or the way plants grow in space, or how fluids move, or protein crystals grow, or all that stuff. But it's so all of it is just has some little piece of it that you're like, man, I didn't know that. That is super cool. And you want to know more about it. And then you just become more curious. And you're really thankful that the scientists can kind of try to explain it to you. But you want to just do the work right for them. And yeah, it's so neat to be able to be part of that. And feel like I don't know if you have the commercials over there, that we have a commercial here in the US that it's some hotel chain, and it's like, I'm not a doctor, but I stayed at a Holiday Inn Express last night and I feel like I could do brain surgery. It's kind of like, you're doing these things that you never ever would have expected to do. And it's really special to have that opportunity.
And you're up there, as you said, working with people from all over the world and working in cooperation with them, and also getting to look down at Earth, as you said, with the mute button on and just see it
Yeah.
as you describe it in Back to Earth. And I think you actually mentioned this earlier, as our spaceship Earth, where we're all one crew. So how did being in space, working with these people and seeing the Earth at that distance, change your perspective about life on Earth?
Well, I think it's funny to me because I went all these things that I'm going to say to you now about what the kind of the perspective shift I knew before I went to space. But for some reason they were simple, and I learned them when I was really little, but they just didn't kind of stay with me in a way that I think we should encourage everyone to like bring them into their lives. I went to space with this idea that we're there. It's all about the complexity of it all. It's a really complex thing to get to space on a spaceship, right? To get out of the hold that gravity has on us here, here on this planet, to live and work in space for even a short period of time, to come back to Earth safely. All the science that's going on up there, the maintaining the station, the international partnerships, that's all really complex stuff. But I think in the end, it really was the most important, not to say not any of that's not important, because it hugely is, but the result of all that for me, and I think for my colleagues, is that, man, it's the simple stuff. It's the stuff we need to carry with us that we just don't even necessarily pay attention. Like looking out the window and be like, oh my gosh, we live on a planet. I mean, we know you've taught your students, or
Yeah.
somebody before you has, that we live on a planet, right? And that we're all earthlings, that the only border that matters, that thin blue line of atmosphere. And that's the same kind of thing we need to be carrying with us every day down here on Earth. And I think those are the kinds of things, those are the simple, yet I would argue pretty profound, compelling things that then make us realize that we need to accept our role as crewmates on Spaceship Earth. We need to set aside this idea of being a passenger here and really kind of stand up to this, like vital role we have as crewmates, here on Spaceship Earth.
Yeah, because like on the International Space Station or the Space Shuttle, every crew member has something to do, and without somebody pulling their weight, things wouldn't work the way they should. So it's the same here
Yeah.
on Earth, then, that everybody should be doing their part to make even just their little bit of Earth that bit better for those around.
Yeah. And I think about it now and I'm like every day I wake up, my feet hit the floor and I'm like, I am standing on a planet. And then I don't know if it's my mantra now or what, but I try to reflect on those, I guess, four things. I'm on a planet, I'm an earthling, I look up at the sky, my feet are grounded on this planet as an earthling, and I'm looking up at the sky that seems to go on forever. And yet I know it's like this veil thin, blanket of protection for us. And it just reminds me that I need to be, thinking about how much CO2 is in my atmosphere. I need to be thinking about where does my clean drinking water come from, about the health and well-being of all the life I share my planet with. And I mean, that just, I don't know, it sets the day off a little bit differently. And then I think you're like wanting, okay, what action can I take? Where can I be doing good for not just myself and my survival, but the survival of my family and my dog and my neighbors. And that just expands to, the other side of the planet. And I think, your students, our kids, if we, if we share those ideas with them, it'll just carry forward with them in their lives. And they're going to want to be looking out for, not just the awe and wonder that surrounds them, but they're going to be looking for, okay, where can I be? What's my role on this crew and how do I make life better for everybody?
And it's a good way to look at it. And that is something that I know as teachers we try and instill in our pupils, but it's good for everybody to have that sort of perspective. And while you were in space and getting this opportunity to look out the cupola window and get that perspective of Earth, you also found time to paint a watercolour, which is, I believe is in the Smithsonian Museum. So has that always been something that you've been interested in, or did you take that up close to the time of going?
Yeah, I mean, I've always been kind of artsy craftsy. I've always loved, creating things. It's all experimental for me. I never like trained. I never went and took art classes or studied art in school or anything, but I've always loved it. And my mom and dad were very, supportive. I grew up in the 60s and 70s where, my mom was doing pottery and macrame and hooked rugs and stuff. And she'd take me and my sister with her, and so we got exposed to that. And, she opened up this idea that you can be creative and you can be, and then later you can study engineering if you want. There's not like this force field that keeps those things apart. You can do all of that kind of thing. And my dad built and flew small airplanes growing up. And that's a very technical thing to do in terms of making an airplane fly, but it's a very creative thing too, and you can ask my mom, who's washer and dryer in the garage where my dad's painting all the airplane parts. Her washer and dryer and my sister's bikes were all of those colors, too. But yeah, it was really, really cool to paint in space. And I wouldn't have thought about it on my own. I just wouldn't have even considered it. So very thankful that somebody encouraged me to think about what I might want to do while I'm in space.
And you mentioned a bit there about your home life and growing up. So that's a good point to bring in this question of where did your interest in STEM come from? You obviously mentioned your dad there building planes, but is that where it came from or did it come from somewhere
I
else?
think you mean, I think that's where it really started because of course I'm so old. We didn't have the acronym STEM back in my day. It just wasn't, we didn't have that. And we won't go down this path, but I could argue why maybe we shouldn't have that. Maybe we should just be encouraging kids to use their whole brain, right? And here's where the STEM me kind of stuff fits in. But without even knowing it, I think just this love of flying, of being surrounded by people who loved flying. I mean, it made me want to know how things fly. Back to the first question of, aeronautical engineering that I didn't even really know anything about. I just knew I wanted to know how things fly. And yeah, I think that was just paying attention to what I was curious about is what led me into this STEM world. And I am so thankful for it because I think it's what opened up even more opportunities from the creative side of things too. To use my whole brain to solve challenging problems, and then to be able to bring something that's so creative, like just painting a watercolor painting, completely independent of anything else, to this really technical place like a space station. It's kind of cool that as humans, we want to take our human stuff with us no matter where we go. And so was very happy to be able to do it there.
And now you're bringing all of that together with your time in space and your time obviously doing the watercolor and art with the Space for Art Foundation. So can you tell us
Yeah.
a bit about what the Space for Art Foundation do?
Well, I can tell you, so in the simplest terms, it's really like space themed art therapy with kids all over the world. And I say art therapy, I think really the way we should say it is like space themed art and wellness kind of programs, because it's expanded well beyond working with kids in hospitals, but to kids in refugee centers and orphanages and very rural schools and places around the world. And our motto is that we are uniting a planetary community of children through the awe and wonder of space exploration and the healing power of art. And I'll tell you, I really, really feel like I got to go to space, and there was some reason why I liked doing artsy craftsy things that is all coming together now in this, this mission of Space for Art. I've found, I think, the best purpose and all of what I've done kind of wraps up in this now. And even if I'm not directly working on projects with my friends at the Space for Art Foundation, everything else I'm doing, there's like a bit of that Space for Art that kind of feeds into it. And so I feel like speaking to you today is part of this too. It's like, how do we share this awesomeness of what we're doing in space that's all about improving life on Earth? How do we encourage our kids to want to be part of that, challenging world and use their whole brains to bring the best of all of their talents to bear as crewmates? And I think working with the kids on the Space for Art Foundation, I've found like the best of all those worlds. It's really a wonderful thing.
And that sounds like an incredible mission with the type of people that you're trying to support. So I'll put a link in the description to the Space for Art Foundation website so people can find out
Thanks.
more about it and support it however they can. But your answer to
Yeah.
that brings us to a nice point for usually, which is how I finish up the interviews, which is what advice would you give to children and young people who are perhaps interested in STEM, but they're not sure what they can do with it or how to pursue it as a career?
I think, for anybody, I think that's even remotely interested in something in STEM, there's usually a curiosity, right? There's something like, for me, it was flying. And without even knowing it, flying became this inspirational thing that led me down this path of meeting people, of having different experiences, of studying things at school that opened up opportunities. I mean, the idea of being an astronaut, like I said, that seemed so impossible. And not because somebody had told me I couldn't do it, but just because it seemed so like, wow, that's other special people. And I think by paying attention to what we're curious about, it puts us in the place to meet those other people, to have those experiences, and to discover things like being an astronaut, maybe, that it takes it from, seeming impossible to becoming possible. And I don't know, the curiosity thing is the biggest to me. And again, it's why I love what you're doing here, like bringing different stories from different people to your students in a way that maybe they find their connection to it and what they're curious about and can then, navigate their little, unique path along the way to whatever it is they want to do.